Today, we're talking about something really important: how to store and use gas for heating and cooking when civilization has abandoned us. Before we get started, check out the link in the description to download our ebook. Check out our merch, brand new Christmas stock. Use the discount code YouTube, link in the description. Now let's get back to the video. And by us, I mean mostly me, because I tend to make questionable life choices. Like this entire script, but don't worry, I've only set off 3 fires in my garage this week, so I'm basically a professional. Now, the rule of thumb is safety first, explosions last. And I mean that literally. Explosions should always be last, or preferably not at all. But I get ahead of myself. Let's dive in. Before we talk about storing gas, we need to talk about what we're storing it in. Because here's the thing, not all containers are created equal, and some of them will literally kill you. But the fun kind of kill you? Not really. I'm joking. Please don't die. First up, metal cans. These are classic. They're sturdy, they're reliable, and they've been around since your grandpa's grandpa decided fire was pretty cool. Metal cans come in different sizes, usually from 5 gallons up to, well, as big as you want if you hate your life. The benefit of metal is that it won't degrade in sunlight, which plastic will. The downside is that metal can rust, which creates tiny little holes, and tiny little holes are the beginning of tiny little disasters that become big explosions. Then there's plastic containers. Now, here's where people mess up. You cannot use just any plastic container. I once saw a guy use a Tupperware bin to store gasoline. I say saw in the past tense because he no longer has eyebrows. Gasoline eats through most plastics, like it's hungry and angry. You need specific containers marked for fuel storage. They're usually a reddish color, they have warnings all over them, and they cost more than you think they should. That's because they're not trying to kill you. Revolutionary concept. There's also the jerry can, which is this awesome military-style metal container with a handle. It's designed specifically for fuel transport. It's sealed tight, and it looks super cool. I have 17 of them. My insurance company is not happy about this. Now, the most important thing about any container is the seal. A good seal means your gas stays inside the container. A bad seal means your gas becomes a vapor that hangs out in your space and waits for a spark. Any spark. A lighter spark. A static spark. A spark from your overconfident friend named Gamma trying to light a cigarette indoors. All bad. Here's the terrifying part that should absolutely terrify you. Gasoline leaks are basically invisible death. You can't see gas vapors, but your nose can smell them, and your lungs can definitely feel them. Gasoline vapor is heavier than air, so it sinks down and fills up spaces like it's looking for trouble. And spoiler alert, it always finds trouble. A small leak in a container can release fumes that accumulate in your storage area. These fumes are flammable, extremely flammable. We're talking one static spark, and everything is fire flammable. I once had a tiny pinhole leak in a container I stored in my shed. I didn't notice for 3 days. On day 4, I walked out there with a flashlight, and no, I didn't cause an explosion. But the flashlight battery created a tiny spark when I turned it on, and that was enough to make me never trust my instincts again. The worst part, leaks in containers don't always make sense. Sometimes the seal fails. Sometimes the container cracks from temperature changes. Sometimes you drop it and don't notice, and the damage shows up weeks later when you've already stored 17 gallons next to your winter coats. That's a real scenario. That happened to me. I no longer have those coats. Now, in a survival situation, you probably don't have access to a fancy fire-rated cabinet. So, what do? You improvise. But you improvise smart, not gamma smart. First rule, never store fuel indoors. Never. Not in your basement. Not in your garage where your heater is. Not in your closet, because it's convenient. The fumes will accumulate, and your home will become a pressure cooker of explosive potential. Store fuel outside, away from your dwelling. If you're scavenging materials to create a storage area, look for something well ventilated. A wooden structure with open sides is perfect because the airflow keeps vapors from accumulating. Think of it like a garden shed, but with way more space between the boards. You want air to flow through it like you're trying to dry out a wet dog. Here's something people don't think about. Temperature fluctuations. On a hot day, gas expands. On a cold day, it contracts. If your container is sealed completely, that expansion has nowhere to go. That's why many fuel containers have small pressure relief vents. If you're using scavenged containers, you need to account for this. A container with no relief system might actually crack or rupture as temperatures change. I once used a completely sealed plastic container for storage. The sun hit it, the fuel expanded, and the container started bulging like a balloon. I cut a small vent hole in the top carefully, using a drill bit, not a nail, because nails create friction, and friction creates sparks. The container deflated. Crisis averted. Mostly, location matters too. Don't store fuel near your water supply, don't store it near your food, and for the love of all that is sacred, do not store it near your sleeping area. Keep it at least 30 feet away from any structure, and even further if possible. Also, keep it away from ignition sources. This means no heaters, no open flames, no electrical equipment that might spark. And yes, I learned this the hard way. The scars have mostly faded. If you're storing multiple containers, keep them organized. Mark them clearly so you don't accidentally grab diesel instead of gasoline, because mixing fuels is a great way to ruin both your equipment and your day. Use labels that won't wash off in rain. I once labeled my containers with a marker that faded in the sun. I spent 3 terrifying weeks thinking I had gasoline when I actually had kerosene. Everything worked out fine, but my stress levels suggest otherwise. Before you store fuel, you need to know if your container is sound. There are a few ways to do this, and only some of them involve almost setting yourself on fire. The water test is smart, not with the gas already in it, obviously. You empty the container completely, rinse it out, fill it with water, and look for leaks. Water will drip out where gas would drip out. You can see water. You can see that leak. Mark it, and then decide if you can seal it or if you need a new container. The visual inspection is also important. Look for cracks, dents, rust, or any damage to the container. Run your hand over it. If you feel something rough or weakened, that's a problem. Rust is especially sneaky because it can look tiny from the outside, but be much worse on the inside. If you see rust, that container is done. Get rid of it. The sniff test is real, but also dangerous, which is why it's mostly a last resort. A tiny bit of gas smell around a container is normal. A strong smell means a leak, but don't stick your face right up to the container and inhale deeply. That's how you get lightheaded and make poor decisions. Ask me how I know. Actually, don't. I'm still embarrassed. If you suspect a leak while the container is full, you can use a soap solution. Mix dish soap with water, spray it on the container, and look for bubbles. Bubbles mean gas is escaping. This is a good test, but it's a little dramatic because you're essentially looking for proof that you've made a terrible choice. Once you've confirmed a container is safe, you can use it, but keep checking periodically. Containers age, seals degrade. That perfectly safe container from last month might be leaking by next month. Stay vigilant. Okay, so you've stored your fuel safely, and now you need to actually use it. This is where chaos enters the chat. This is where overconfident survivors with strong opinions and strong fumes make mistakes. First, the basics. You're going to use a camping stove, a portable heater, or some kind of fuel-burning device. These devices have specific ignition systems. Use them. Don't improvise. I once thought I could light a camping stove by holding it near a candle flame. I was wrong. My eyebrows were victims. They've since returned, but they're cautious now. When you ignite a stove or heater, prepare your space first. Make sure you're outside or in a well-ventilated area. Never ignite fuel-burning equipment indoors unless it's specifically designed to be used indoors. Yes, there are indoor safe heaters and stoves. No, your camping stove is not one of them. The carbon monoxide will kill you slowly while you enjoy the warmth. That's a bad deal. Here's a myth. You cannot light gasoline with a cigarette. Most people think gasoline is so flammable that a cigarette will ignite it. The truth is more complicated. Gasoline vapors are flammable, but liquid gasoline is surprisingly hard to light with just a cigarette. However, don't test this. I mean, I tested it. It didn't work, but I was also extremely anxious the entire time, and I wouldn't recommend the experience. What will light gasoline is anything with a real flame. A lighter, a match, a spark. This is why you don't use lighters or matches near fuel containers ever. That's the rule. Unbreakable rule. I once broke it while trying to read the label on a fuel container in dim light. I used a lighter to see better. Nothing caught fire, but I aged 10 years in 30 seconds. For ignition, use the device's built-in ignition system. Most camping stoves have igniters or come with a lighter specifically for that purpose. Use those if the ignition doesn't work immediately. Wait a moment before trying again. Don't assume it failed and try something else. That's how you accumulate fuel and gas fumes, and then when it finally ignites, you get a fireball. I know this is true. I've seen it. I didn't cause it, probably. If you're in a survival situation and you need to ignite fuel without a proper device, understand that you're doing something risky. You can use a controlled spark, but you need to be methodical. Set up your fuel in a safe location, create a small kindling fire nearby, and transfer heat to the fuel carefully. This is not easy. This is not safe. This is a last resort. And if you're doing this, you've probably already made several mistakes that led you here. Let's talk about common myths that can kill you, because understanding them might save your life, or at least your eyebrows. Myth number 1, gasoline doesn't evaporate. This is completely false. Gasoline evaporates constantly, especially in warm weather. That's why your container needs to be sealed. That's why vapor accumulation is a real danger. I stored an open container of gasoline in my shed for approximately 6 hours. The smell was so strong that I thought there was a leak. There wasn't. The gasoline was just escaping into the air. I sealed it, and the smell went away. Lesson learned. Myth number 2. You can store fuel in any container as long as it's sealed. False. Material matters. Gasoline will degrade certain plastics and corrode certain metals. A sealed beer bottle is not a fuel container. I'm not saying I tried this, but if I had, it would have been a mistake. Myth number 3. Cold weather stops fuel from being dangerous. This is so false. Cold fuel is still fuel. It's still flammable. It's still explosive. It just might be less volatile, but that doesn't mean you should drop your guard. I once thought that because it was winter, I could be more casual with my fuel storage. I was wrong. Fuel is fuel, and winter doesn't grant immunity from explosions. Myth number 4. Fuel fumes are heavier than air, so they'll stay near the ground. Partially true, but also misleading. Yes, fumes are heavier than air, but they still spread. They diffuse. They find their way into spaces you didn't expect. That's why ventilation is critical. Ventilation doesn't just mean opening a window. It means airflow. It means movement. It means your storage area can't be a sealed box with a small window. Myth number 5. A little leak is fine. No, a little leak is how big disasters start. I once saw a tiny pinhole in a metal can. Just a tiny thing. I thought I could patch it. I couldn't. The patch failed, and the leak got worse. I eventually had to transfer the fuel to a new container, and that transfer process was about 1,000 times more dangerous than just replacing the container in the first place. Myth number 6. You can heat your home by storing fuel-burning equipment indoors. You can, but you'll die. Not immediately, but carbon monoxide will accumulate, and you'll lose consciousness, and you won't wake up. This is not a myth. This is a fact that I'm including in the myths section because people believe it anyway. Never do this, get a proper indoor safe heater, or don't heat your home. Those are your options. Now, let me tell you about some chaotic moments that will hopefully inspire you to never do these things. There was the time I tried to consolidate fuel from 2 containers into one. I was using a funnel. The funnel was plastic. The gasoline started to degrade the funnel. The funnel developed a hole. Gas started pouring onto the ground. I panicked, dropped the funnel, jumped back, and the whole thing looked like a disaster movie scene. Everything was fine, but I learned that not all funnels are fuel safe. Now I use metal funnels. Problem solved. Then there was the incident where I stored fuel next to my camping gear. Camping gear has fabric. Fabric absorbs gasoline smell. I reached into my tent to grab a sleeping bag, and the fumes nearly knocked me over. I realized the fuel container was leaking very slightly, and the vapor had permeated everything nearby. I moved the fuel container immediately, threw the sleeping bag outside for ventilation, and decided that proximity matters. A lot. That sleeping bag still smells faintly of gasoline, which is not the aesthetic I was going for. There's also the classic mistake of not labeling containers correctly. I once had 3 containers that looked identical. One had gasoline, one had diesel, and one had kerosene. I grabbed the wrong one for my camping stove. I discovered this when the stove sputtered, produced black smoke, and nearly exploded. Well, not exploded, but it did something very concerning. Now everything is labeled clearly in multiple languages and colors and shapes. I'm paranoid, and I've earned that paranoia. One more. I tried to clean a fuel container with water and thought that would make it safe to use for something else, like storage of other materials. I didn't realize that water mixed with gasoline residue creates a corrosive paste that eats through most materials. I attempted to store dry beans in the container. The beans got weird. I didn't eat them. Good call. Gamma. And then there was the time I assumed a fuel container was empty when I was done with it for the season. It wasn't completely empty. There was still a small amount of fuel at the bottom. I sealed it and stored it. Months later, I went to use it and found that the fuel had separated, degraded, and turned into a varnish-like substance. It clogged every fuel line I used it in. Now I always shake my containers before storage, and I drain them completely when I'm not actively using them. Here's the thing about fuel storage and safety. It seems boring. It seems overcautious. It seems like I'm being paranoid when I tell you to check your containers weekly, to keep them far from your home, to ventilate your storage area, to never mix fuel types, to label everything clearly, and to treat gasoline like it's an angry wasp that's waiting for any reason to sting you. But I'm not being paranoid. I'm being realistic. Fuel is powerful. Fuel is useful. But fuel is also unforgiving. It doesn't care about your intentions. It doesn't care that you just want to heat your home or cook your food. It will blow up your home and burn down your life if you give it a reason to. The people who say safety is boring are the people who haven't lived through a fuel-related disaster. And I'm saying that as someone who's had several fuel-related incidents that didn't become disasters, mostly because I got lucky. So here's my final message. Safety first, explosions last. And ideally, no explosions at all. Ever. That's the goal. Take your time with fuel storage. Take your precautions seriously. Label your containers. Check for leaks, ventilate your space. Use the right equipment. And if you're not sure about something, don't do it. Or do it very carefully, very far from anything important, and very far from me, because I've learned enough lessons for both of us. Now go forth, survive responsibly, and remember, your eyebrows depend on it. If you found this educational, helpful, or just chaotically entertaining, please like and subscribe.